Okay, welcome back to the Human Project. Today I want to review what we could call the essential ideas of Marx's understanding of history. And some of this I've talked about before, but it doesn't hurt to go over it because it's amazing how often this is overlooked and people just don't see it. And a lot of that is because we're still not thinking dialectically. We're tending to think in the old terms. So I'm going to get into that a little bit in a few minutes. But first, let's just review. So history is about people. It's not just this thing, history. It's the history of class dynamics, class being the relations that people have to the production process. Who owns things, who produces things, who gets what. And as I mentioned before, that's also temporal relations. So what's people's relationship to time? So obviously today, the billionaire who's making $1 billion while he's sleeping has a different relationship to time than somebody else who has to work an entire day to make a few $100s. So they have a different relationship to time. Their lives are different temporally. Okay, that's one thing. So economics is people. It's the infrastructure, the dynamics within which we live. So right there, we have to overcome the pre-Marxist idea that people are here and economics is there and history is there. It's all one thing. And maybe at this point, let me just go into Hegel a minute or two. In the second to the last chapter of the Logic, which I just happened to read because I always skip to the last chapter of something because that's where everything culminates. But in the next to the last chapter, Hegel is saying he's trying to get across the point of thinking dialectically how everything is kind of all one thing, and so we're thinking differently. Then, okay, here's a thing here, here's its motion there, here's like its form here, its content there, its temporality over there. So everything is kind of separate things. And Hegel is showing how it's all one thing. So that something, the form of the thing, the content of the thing, its existence in time, its development and transformations, is all one thing. So the thing in itself contains all these things. So nothing is separate. And that's really the key to dialectical thinking. So we have to really try to be overcoming this way of thinking that sees things as separate. So a key example here is the idea of determinism. This is a very important idea in Marx. It can't be discarded, much as many Marxists, academics, have tried to do that because it's not an idea that's very welcome in the academic world. In fact, let me mention this for a minute. Academia and the media, kind of public sphere in general, kicked out Marxists who were mostly communist in the 40s and 50s. Then out of the rubble, they started allowing a few Marxists back into academia. But they had certain requirements. You couldn't like Lenin, you couldn't like Engels, you couldn't like determinism, you couldn't like communism. But if you were willing to let go of all that, here's your entrance ticket for an academic career. The idea of determinism means something is determined. It's necessarily happening. And Marxists, academic Marxists, have not liked this because obviously it sort of conflicts with the idea of free will. And they like the idea of free will, which to me, once you're really a Marxist, you see that free will sort of exists in a way, but who we are is already determined. So our form of being, our personhood, is determined by historical dynamics. So yes, we have free will within that. We can choose A or B, but we can't really choose the person that we are, or what, our being as a person. That's already determined. So, okay, in this section on historical materialism in the German ideology, Marx and Engels, I don't know who's mostly responsible, repeatedly use the word determine. Determined, ed, determinate, ate, or determine, e, as a verb. So as a verb, an adverb, whatever. Of course, that's in German, but this is, how you translate it. Now, very often the translator, as in other places, or decided he's going to be creative, and this happened again in the Communist Manifesto. So he's going to be creative and do Marx the favor of taking some of those words determined and changing them because, when we take writing 101, we learn that you shouldn't keep repeating the same word. You should find, other versions of a word. So the translator did the favor of changing some of those words. But then it loses the meaning of where Marx and Engels were deliberately repeating the word determine over and over to press home the point that this is their understanding of history, that things don't happen by accident. So what does determinate mean? So let's take the example of temperature. Temperature is determinate. Now, is that a noun? I don't know what it is. Means it's in the realm of being determined. It's not happening by accident. So the world is divided between what's called contingent, things that really just happen by accident, or determinate, meaning it's determined. It didn't happen by accident. Now, even accidental things like, the tree out there, falling over, it might have been, it was an accident, but it might have been determined in some longer term sense. The soil was loose, too much water, whatever. So, but okay, Marx is repeating the idea that the events of history, the development of history is determinate, is lawful. It doesn't happen by accident. So it's determined that ancient society will evolve into feudal society. And it's determinate that feudal society will evolve into capitalist society. Similarly, and here's where people really get hung up, it's determinate that capitalist society will evolve into the next form of society. And I hate to use the C word because I don't know, maybe YouTube will cancel me or something. It's, it's gotten such a bad rap, we have to come up with another word. A post-capitalist society, a society in which there are no longer any classes, where there's no longer any private property, and so on. Call it what you will. Whatever you call it, you can be sure that the elite of today, of the systems today, will do their very, very best to give it a bad rap and to suppress that kind of thinking. So, okay, the transition from capitalism to post-capitalism is determinate. It has to happen. So what does that mean? It means that the dynamics keep on going, and so that everything moving us in that direction keeps happening. It has to happen. It can't be stopped. Here I have to think of Woody Allen's famous little joke, where he's saying, "I'm not afraid of death. I just don't want to be there when it happens." So, with history, I'm not afraid of the end of capitalism. I just don't want to be there when it happens. Because we don't know what's going to happen, but it has to happen. So, okay, so those are some of the main ideas of Marxism that we can't do without. So with determinism, I want to give the example of Marx went to great pains to try to explain how determinism works in a dialectical sense. And here My favorite example is one of his introductions to one of the editions of Capital, where he's trying to explain how to think dialectically about determination. That it's not like I said, here's the thing, here's something else, like in playing pool that bangs into that thing, so this always determines that. It's no, the determination is built into the thing itself. And there's no separation between a thing and its determinations, or a set of things. So Marx is showing how in history there's any number of events that seem to have just happened. This guy invades that, and this happens here. I mean, all of history seems like it's sort of accidental and it just happened. But if you look underneath it, you see these underlying forces that inexorably move things in a certain direction. And so you have to look underneath the surface of events, and you find the forces moving things forward. So say, for instance, in the transition from feudalism to capitalism, there's thousands, millions of separate things happening, all of which seem like, oh, somebody just decided this or happened by accident, but all taken together, they're inevitably moving things ahead to this transition. So Marx used the phrase, through the kind of array of surface events of history, determination boldly sees its way through. So in other words, determination isn't a thing, and things aren't things. It's all like a process, and we're looking at different levels of it. And I know it's hard to see that, but that's what, if we want to think dialectically, we have to let go of the idea of things being separate from their motion and development. So Marx used the phrase brassy, brazen, which is taken from the word brass, so which you can translate as either brazen or bold. So, but he used the word brazen. So he said, determination brazenly shows its way through. But the translator thought he'd be real clever, and he didn't like that word, so he changed. He said, oh, well, one metal, I'm going to substitute it for another. So he translated it as ironclad. So determination is ironclad instead of brazen. Well, that totally changes the meaning. So then, as if that wasn't enough, some academic wrote an entire book disagreeing with Marx's idea of determination, of determinism, based on that mistranslation. And apparently, I don't remember who was supporting him or what university he was from, but apparently he didn't think to go back and look at the original because he kept quoting that mistranslation, and he didn't like it. Well, of course not. Determination is ironclad. But this actually became a big argument against Marx's idea of determination. Well, obviously there's free will, and we can't agree with ironclad, this or that. Well, that's, dopey, because that's not what Marx is saying. I mean, it's literally not what he was saying, and it's certainly not the idea. So, okay, that's just an example of we have to, be aware and try to overcome these pre-Marxist ways of thinking. And as far as the society that we're trying to move toward, again, something I want to stress here repeatedly, Marx and Engels aren't saying they would never say they've invented this, that, oh, it's an idea they came up with. That's why they call it scientific socialism, that it's scientific. Now, they say all of history up until now is prehistory. We haven't yet become human. So this process, in other words, we became potentially human when we sort of evolved into human beings, as I said earlier, at a point where we're no longer functioning with a group, but we're functioning within a dynamic of relations of production. So that's the beginning of human history. But according to Marx and Engels, it's really the beginning of human prehistory, because then we have to get from there all the way through the different forms of class society until we become fully human. And so what does that mean? It's hard to even imagine, but this again is an essential idea of Marxism that's too often left out of discussions because it's too hard to imagine it. And we can't even think it in our normal ways of thinking. So our choice is either try to overcome our previous way of thinking and think like a Marxist, or just give up on it and think some sort of modified form of bourgeois sociology, which is actually what passes for Marxism in most of academia, because that's what academia is comfortable with. So if you want to be a professor of sociology and then you want to say, well, we haven't become human yet, and in order to become human, we have to eliminate class society. I don't know if the head of the department is going to really give you any brownie points for that, or if the publishers are going to let you publish that. That's why you don't hear that idea very much, because it's just too hard to get it across, and it's too hard to even understand what that means. But that's our job. As if we want to be Marxist, that's exactly our job. Figure out what does that mean, that we have not yet become human, and in order to become human, this is what we need to do. Move to the next form of society, post-classes. Now, just what popped into my mind, there's some YouTube channel that claims to be about Marxism, but actually it's anti-Marxism. And there's actually a number of those. There's, the more people get interested in Marxism, the more there's going to be a barrage of propaganda trying to steer us in a different direction. So there's one guy who's constantly saying, well, socialism can't work because people naturally want to own things. They want to have property. That would be like in 1400 say, oh well, feudalism can't work. People, or capitalism can't work because people need kings and queens. They like to bow down. That's just the kind of way they like to do things. They like having a church that's telling them what to do. That's what people like. So we can't evolve to another form of society. So in other words, as dumb as that. So this is the kind of thing we have to put up with. But the point is, in order to be a Marxist, you have to really be making a conscious effort to think like a Marxist, to think dialectics. And so you have to constantly challenge your thinking to see, is it that integral form of thinking which sees everything as one thing? Like I said, temporality, development, the thing, its own causation. It's all part of one process. It's not separate things. And there's another point, but I forgot it. So, but this is what you have to do, to think as a Marxist. Okay, that's enough for today.